You'd never think a simple bag of trash could spark an international crisis, right? Well, that is exactly what's happening right now on the border between the US and Canada. In this explainer, we are going to unpack how a few pennies and a literal mountain of garbage have pushed two of the world's closest allies right to the edge.
Now this is not the kind of thing you expect to hear from a Canadian premier about a sitting U.S. president, but that's exactly what Ontario's Doug Ford said back in February 2026. He said it just moments after a total bombshell decision from the U.S. Supreme Court, a ruling that completely blew up a simmering trade war and set the stage for one heck of a showdown.
And this timeline here really shows you the core tension. See, on February 20th, Canada scored this huge victory when the Supreme Court killed a massive set of tariffs. But, they didn't get to celebrate for long. Because on July 1st, the entire North American Trade Agreement, the USMCA, is up for a mandatory review. That's a deadline that could either solve this whole mess or make it explode.
So, to really get how we got here, here's our roadmap. We're going to break down that tariff bombshell, expose the tiny 36-cent lure that kicked this all off, look at Michigan's failed attempt to kind of build a wall against waste, untangle a critical loophole in the USMCA, see Ontario's last-ditch effort to save itself, and finally, set the stage for the big 2026 standoff.
Okay, so let's start with the event that just poured gasoline all over this fire, that huge court ruling.
For months, the main weapon in this whole trade war was a massive 35% tariff on most things coming in from Canada. Now, the Trump administration used its emergency powers to do this, claiming it was a response to national security threats like fentanyl and illegal migration. It was a justification that, let's just say, a lot of people and businesses found pretty controversial.
And then came the shockwave. In a case called Learning Resources, Inc. versus Trump, the Supreme Court decided, 6-3, that the administration had gone too far, that it had overstepped its authority. And just like that, poof, the legal basis for that 35% tariff was gone. It created total chaos, but for Canada, it also created a massive window of opportunity.
But to really understand why this whole tariff battle is so tied up with, of all things, garbage, we have to rewind. We have to look at this simple, almost unbelievable economic fact that started this whole mess.
36 cents. That's it. That is the state fee, they call it a tipping fee, to dump 1 ton of garbage in a Michigan landfill. For less than what you'd pay for a piece of gum, you can bury 2,000 pounds of trash. It's wild. Now, look at this chart to get some perspective. While Michigan is charging just 36 cents, its neighbor Ohio is charging $4.75. And Wisconsin? A whopping 13 bucks. Michigan isn't just cheap. It's a massive flashing neon sign creating this irresistible economic pull to ship trash across state and national lines.
And the result of that 36-cent lure? Well, it's this number. 3.46 million tons of Canadian trash comes across the border into Michigan every single year. It's so much that it's now over 14% of all the waste buried in the entire state. I mean, you can imagine the pressure on local landfills, the environmental concerns. It's left a lot of people in Michigan feeling like their state has become the region's official dumping ground.
Which, of course, brings us to Michigan's governor, Gretchen Whitmer. She's been trying to solve this problem at the state level for years. The plan made perfect sense, but in the end, it was completely doomed.
Governor Whitmer's idea was simple. Raise that tipping fee to $5 a ton. This would basically bring Michigan in line with its neighbors and get rid of that economic magnet for Canada. But as you can see, when the state's 2026 budget was finalized back in October of 2025, the proposal was dead. The fee stayed at just 36 cents. So what happened?
Well, what's stopping Michigan from just charging the Canadian trucks more? The answer is buried deep in the U.S. Constitution's Commerce Clause. This rule basically says states can't put up their own little trade barriers. So Michigan can't charge Canadian garbage trucks more than it charges its own local businesses. Any fee hike would be a trash tax on absolutely everyone, which made it politically impossible to pass. Michigan was completely trapped.
So, with the state solution totally blocked, the fight shot up to the federal level, all centering on the USMCA trade deal itself. And this is where we find a critical loophole and a really dangerous trap. Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Even when those massive 35% emergency tariffs were in place, all those trash shipments were exempt. Why? Because under the trade deal, trash is legally classified as an originating good. Think about it like this. If you grow an apple in Canada and sell it in the US, it's a Canadian product. Well, the same weird logic applies to trash. Because it originated in Canada, it got a free pass from the tariffs. This one tiny legal definition was shielding all 3.46 million tons of it.
But here is the catch. While the trash itself was safe, the trucks carrying it were not. Why? Because every single garbage truck is filled with a mix of stuff, including things that weren't made in Canada. Chinese-made plastics, old electronics, you name it. This meant every truck was at risk of getting slapped with a 40% transshipment penalty. It was this constant threat that created so much uncertainty at the border, even with the loophole.
So let's flip this around now and see how this all looks from Ontario's side. Premier Doug Ford is staring down his own ticking clock, and the threat of the U.S. border closing to his province's garbage has forced him to make a really desperate move.
This table really says it all. If Ontario can keep sending its trash over to Michigan, its own landfills won't be full until 2037. But if that border slams shut, that clock jumps forward 3 whole years to 2034. For a province that size, that's a full-blown infrastructure crisis. And that looming crisis is the entire reason behind Ontario's controversial Bill 5. Looking at that doomsday clock and explicitly getting ready for a potential U.S. border closure, Ford's government passed the law to fast-track a new landfill. And to do it, they had to override the normal environmental assessments. It's a huge tell. It shows just how high the stakes really are for Ontario.
And that brings us right back to today, to this incredibly shaky situation. All the pieces are on the board. Every major player is basically backed into a corner. And it's all leading to a final standoff that is going to define the future of this relationship. So let's just quickly recap where we are. The Supreme Court's ruling basically hit the reset button on the whole tariff fight. Michigan's attempt to fix this on its own has failed. Ontario is running out of time and space. And so, all eyes in Lansing, in Toronto, and in Washington, D.C. are glued to one single date, July 1st, 2026. That's the day of the mandatory USMCA review. And this is not just some meeting about garbage. This is where the entire trade relationship between these countries could be completely rewritten, or even ripped up entirely. The fate of that 36-cent fee, those 3.46 million tons of trash, and billions of dollars in other trade. It is all on the table.
And so, this is the question we're all left with. After a Supreme Court decision threw out the old rulebook, and with state-level fixes being impossible, the foundation of this relationship is just unstable. This upcoming review is a choice. Will the U.S. and Canada figure out a way to build a new bridge for trade, or is this trash war finally going to end with a permanent wall?